It's time to check your money with Mike Jennings. Mike Jennings is a wealth advisor and financial planning associate with Brackens Financial Solutions Network LLC, registered representative of LPL Financial, member SIPC. Mike, how you doing today?
I'm good, George. How you doing? What's going on?
I'm great. My birthday is on Tuesday, so I'm all right.
Hey, all right. The the big 48.
Yeah. I'll let you tell it. I'll let you tell it. All right. So, Mike, you got any tips for me this week?
I do. This week I definitely thought we should cover a pretty hot topic that's been making headlines and making its rounds for a couple weeks now. So the No Tax on Tips Act that was recently passed in the Senate and is returned to the House can potentially affect many in the service industry. Have you heard of this bill, George?
No, I haven't. Although well, I've heard that that there was some talk about maybe not having tax on tips, but I didn't know that there was an actual bill.
Yes, absolutely. The original bill was part of the big beautiful one big beautiful I don't even know what it was called, but it was originally part of that. And the idea was taking away or putting a cap actually on income tax for tips, and that is to give people in low earning positions, service positions, a tax break. However, as with anything, the true impact is not so simple. So let's just get right into it, okay? Um, Now, the funny thing about this topic that I've been seeing from many people on social media and seeing reactions and everything is that a lot of people had no idea that tips were subject to income tax in the first place. So hopefully for some of you listeners out there, this is not a news flash for you. But yes, tips have been subject to income tax since 1986. The IRS requires tips over $20 per month to be reported by the employee as part of their income. And they report to the employer reports it to the IRS. And this could be a requirement that can prove pretty challenging for, a lot of these employees, given that everything the employee knows it is required. So tipped employees must report their cash tips to their employers by the 10th of every month. So, for example, the 10th of June, which
My
is
birthday.
your
Yes.
birthday on Tuesday, this Tuesday. So
Yes.
all of you service people out there, when you see George, when you see him out at the restaurant, he gives you that nice big tip. You got to make sure you remember. Do you have to report that to your employer?
As a, as a,
Um,
as a matter of fact, I was going to say, or you could just give me your tips for my birthday, but that's a whole other thing. But but Mike, you mentioned cash tips. Does that mean? Well, first of all, does that mean that non-cash tips are fine? And if is that even such a thing?
so that's a good question, George. And the answer is a little bit complicated, as usual with anything with the government, IRS. So let's look at what the IRS defines as cash tips, right? So the IRS considers cash tips. I'm using my air quotes, people. The IRS considers cash tips to be actual cash. They consider cash tips to be electronic charges. So that is credit and debit. When you get your bill, you use your card, use the tip line. That's considered a cash tip as well as pool tips. So, I know a lot of us have been to a restaurant or something, and they may have it written directly on the receipt, or the bill rather, or somewhere on the menu that the tips are pooled so that the employees in the back of the kitchen and the bussers and everything can get their share as well. So when those tips are pooled and the employer pays those out to individuals, that is also considered cash tips. Um, Now, these are the tips that employees are required to keep track of daily when they work, rather, and report that to their employers. However, employees are also required to keep track of non-cash tips, using my air quotes again, non-cash tips, which can really be any non-monetary, so like paper money item of value that actually has value. So although you don't actually report as an employee, you don't report these tips to your employer, you still must report them to the IRS, same as you do with any other income.
But I
Uh,
got a question for you.
yes, yes.
When you get a to-go order, like at a restaurant, when you well, let's say
Mhm.
let's start with a. I know you do Dash Door or whatever the stuff is. I know you do all of that, right?
Yep,
But
dashboard, Hub
door,
Grub, all
yeah, door
that.
dash, right? Yeah, door dash and whatever the. I know you do that, but
Yep.
if you actually go to a restaurant and pick up a to-go order, do you tip the to-go person?
When I pick up,
If you go, let's say you go to whatever your favorite restaurant is,
right.
and I know one of Vicky's favorite restaurants. So let's say you go to Vicky's, one of Vicky's favorite restaurants, right? You pick up your to-go order. Do you tip that person?
I usually do just as a thank you for the fact that I didn't have to cook anything and go to the store and pick up the ingredients and everything. I know that's like one of those big debates. It's like,
No, the reason why I'm asking you that, like the person who just hands you the bag of your to-go order, you tip that
uh-huh,
person. You
right.
tip it. All right. Well, and I'm glad you do because my son used to work in a place,
Hmm.
and that is something that they expect. And well, I shouldn't say they expect, but they count on that. Even a to-go person, whoever is the host, they also count on that. So that's kind of interesting. So I'm glad you do that. I don't know. I don't always do. I think I do most of the time, but there is an expectation that you're going to tip, even if you pick up the order to go.
Right, right. So, and people rationalize it different ways. If I go and sit down at a restaurant and, I had a good time and the server they're knowledgeable, they're there when I need them and they show top level service, that to me, that's where the tip is coming from. Just to show my appreciation. But again, it's also being able to tip somebody for the ease and convenience of just going somewhere and picking up a meal. So yes, absolutely. And the service industry, especially with things like restaurants, people aren't, most people, they're not given the normal, minimum
They play
wage.
below wage, right? Below
Exactly.
minimum. Yeah.
So most of them actually rely on tips. So this is a big thing. Now, George, have you ever held a position, a job that allowed you to accept tips?
It's so far a long, long time ago. I was an ice cream server at Lincoln Center, and I think that was one of the. I think that's one of the only jobs that I had where they allowed tips that I can recall. But mostly, no. I don't. I haven't had a job really that I was able to accept tips, except that for that one job. And again, that was more pool because they put the jar on the top, and that's
Right.
how we would do it. So not really. No.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I did have a service job. And I did concessions at the Carrier Dome when I was a student at Syracuse. But funny thing, you're not allowed to accept tips there. So anytime a person would like, you couldn't tell them no. They want to
Right.
accept it. They
That's
leave the
right.
cash right on the register. We just had to accept it as a donation
To
to
the
the United Way, which is a great
right.
organization.
Because I've been at the functions and if the students are servers, it
Hmm.
was like no tipping, right? They just say no. And I don't know if that has to do with I don't know what that has to do with, but they don't allow you to do it.
Maybe it's
The-
some
the-
collegiate ruling and things
well,
like
there's one
that.
more thing. A lot sometimes the gratuity is already added, right?
Right.
And they give you the option to add more if you want. Now I'm that person that says, "Well, you already got it, so we good." so, but that's just it's just interesting uh,
Yeah, that's
way that
that's
this is
actually
going.
it's good.
Mhm.
It's good you brought that up. We're gonna talk about that a little bit later too.
Okay, okay.
So now that the breaking news is out of the way, you actually do have to pay taxes on tips. Let's talk about what the new act is proposing, right? So this new act, the No Tax on Tip Act, will provide a tax deduction of up to 25,000 per year for qualified tips. And these is for individuals who make 160,000 or less. Now, I know when it comes to service, the service industry, That is a pretty high threshold, and not that many people are going to reach that or have ever reached that. But that is the threshold. The act also expands business tax credit for taxes paid on certain tips, and namely related to the beauty industry, which is a new thing as far as actually being named in the bill. And I myself, I have a few barber clients that definitely should pay attention to this, and we're going to have a talk about this. And as I mentioned earlier, the act is designed with the intention of giving service industry workers a tax break. The act also requires Congress to publish a list of occupations that have traditionally been known to accept tips. This way, so the occupations that never accepted tips before, they can't turn around and say, "Oh, we accept tips now, and now we fall under this we fall under this thing," right? So they're trying to limit the amount of abuse that any employers can take as part of this act if and when it passes. A particular addition, like I mentioned again, for this act is the inclusion of beauty service occupations. So, like I said, barbers, and that's all hair care workers, nail care, aesthetics, body, and spa treatments. And these were all specifically named in the act itself. Now, we should discuss some of the potential implications of this act, right? It's one thing to just know about it, but what does it really mean, and what could it mean for employees and employers in the future? So like I just touched on, abuse of the law by employers, is there a possibility that employers can reclassify certain wages that they already pay out to employees as tips to avoid paying taxes? I believe it's possible.
Yeah.
Why not? And seeing as how the idea of keeping track of tips in the service industry is already a complicated mess. It's not that out there of a concept, right? Being your own accountant every workday isn't easy. Um, Another criticism of the effectiveness of this act is that many service workers don't make enough to qualify for taxes in the first place. That's what they say, right? And while that is true, and that's also a whole separate issue in its own right, we also know that income for individuals is treated collectively. So those who have a second job or other avenues of income may be subject to income tax in this rule. I know bartenders or service people that work at restaurants that also have another job, right? So those combined incomes definitely could push them above the level to where they owe income tax. And so that again, they'll be subject to this new act as well. How will this affect the mindset of customers? We kind of just went over this, right? Will people tip less if they think workers are getting their tip tax free? What do you think?
Well, no, I don't think people will necessarily tip less. I just think I got a couple of things to say about that. Although, like I said, if the gratuity is already included, I'm not likely to add more. I'm that one. Yeah, I'm like, listen, oh, you got it, you good. One of the things that's interesting, though, to me is that every place you go, if you use a card or whatever it is, you're asked to tip on everything. Even if somebody hands you a cup of coffee, they want to tip. Everything is a tip these days. So that's the thing that bothers me the most. Everything.
Yes.
When does it end?
And you know what? Back to your question. Just for lunch today, or yesterday, it was I was just needed something quick, and I was passing by a certain pizza shop that will remain unnamed. Very good pizza. I love going there. And I just went up. I went and picked up a slice with garlic knot, and I get to the register, use my card. And they're like, "Hey, before you tap, you got to answer a little question on there."
Right, right. Do you want to add a tip? Right, right,
Exactly. And kind of like what you were saying with something like, I'm like, pizza. It only took one person to make the pizza, and
right,
you're selling it to 12 different people, the same pie, 12 different slices.
right,
So
right.
I'm like, come on, it's a pizza. A slice
And
of pizza, a garlic knot,
do you,
you made it a big batch of it. I'm
well,
not too sure about what I'm gonna tip on that.
well, and then some people are against tipping in general. Like some people just don't want to do it. I don't think I will tip less, but I do. I will not add. Normally, I won't add unless it's to your point, exceptional service. If the gratuity is already included. I went somewhere and it was like I had an adult beverage somewhere, and the gratuity was already there. I was like, okay, thank you very much, goodbye.
Hmm.
So it's like,
And it's for those of us that are a little bit traveled, it's so interesting how this is such an American issue. It's such an American issue. Like there are places you can go around the world where people will be offended if you like try to give them a tip. So, I can see the rationality of both sides. But again, just for me personally, it's a level of service if I'm going somewhere and I'm sitting down and the experience of it, or sometimes it's just the convenience. So,
yeah.
you know, uh, again, some of these people they aren't making this huge amount of money in the first place. So I definitely want to show my appreciation for them. So, they come to my table, they got bright beaming smile, and they make sure that I'm feeling good. I have a story. I'm gonna save it. I was I went to Philly recently, and I went to a pub, a friend of me and a friend, and absolutely at every turn, I had the worst service imaginable. And I could excuse that if it was like the food was out of this world, but it also wasn't. So that was something. But we still tipped. We still tipped.
Yeah. But
Um,
did you tip high or did you just tip?
we tipped. It was another thing too with the bills. They right at the bottom they do the calculations for you, so you don't even have to sit there and try to do it. I've been tipping for a while, so I know you just move the decimal, you times it by two, and there's your 20%. That's
Right,
it.
right,
That
right,
easy,
right.
right? You also got to be careful for some of them too. Some of them, those calculations, they're doing it on the total,
On
which
the
already
I
includes
I do check. I check.
you check. Okay. I'm like, no, you got to do the subtotal. 'Cause
No.
this is why this bill's come. Listen, all right. One last point on this act before we sit here all day. The original House version of this bill was, again, it was tied to the one big beautiful bill that this administration put together. This 1,100-page thing, that monstrosity that whatever. Had this original bill had specifically included the self-employed and independent contractors, namely it included them who also traditionally earn tips. But after that passed the House, it went to the Senate, and the Senate they revised it, and now it has to go back to the House, and it has to be they have to be on one accord for this to pass. But the current standalone version that passed in the Senate and went to the House, it does not have that language that was originally in there, meaning that this deduction could potentially not apply to certain income earners, namely, so people like barbers, or people that, if you rent a chair at a beauty salon or something like that, you're an independent contractor. You're not an employee that gets paid a wage. You're an independent contractor. But now this new version of this bill does not name them specifically. So, people are kind of trying to figure out what that means and its implications. But like I said, with all of this is a tricky situation that seems to have as many convoluted implications as the ones that are clearly defined. So we will be keeping an eye on the situation as it evolves, and presuming some version of this bill passes in both chambers of Congress. Um, if you are in the service industry and you want to be aware of how this will affect you personally, individually, don't delay any longer. Give your friendly neighborhood advisor a call at 315-748-5540, or send me a quick note at michael.jennings@brackensfsn.com.
Michael Jennings is a wealth advisor, financial planning associate at Blackens Financial Solutions Network LLC, and a registered representative of LPL Financial member SIPC. He is your friendly neighborhood advisor.